All right, three, two, one. All right, hey guys, welcome back to another video. We're not usually we do a live stream, but today we have a special guest, so a recorded video is much easier to coordinate times, and it's just nice to have some edit options as well.
hmm
Today we are joined by Prakash, who is from Zano, which is a no-code tool that we'll get into. We'll let him explain how it works, and yeah, we're gonna have a nice chat with him.
For sure. All right. So why don't we just kick this off by Prakash, what do you exactly do in Xano?
Yeah, I mean, being a startup founder, the real answer is like a little bit of everything. But my official title is co-CEO. So that
Okay.
basically means that I think that as I help with the strategy, I have opinions on product and how we're also going to kind of grow into this no-code market. And so a lot of my time is spent, I think, primarily on those three functions. But I do a little bit. I mean, I help write the website, the front end for the site as well, marketing copy, documentation. So it's, you
hmm
wear many hats as a startup founder.
All right, cool. Yeah, that makes sense, man. So what exactly is Xano? So before I approached you for, to jump on this podcast, which is a story in itself, I didn't really know what Xano was, to be honest. I knew that
Sure.
it was a no-code platform, but then I checked out your website and it said that's the fastest way to build a back-end system. So why don't you tell us a bit more about what Xano is and the value proposition of Xano?
Yeah, for sure. So Zeno, as you mentioned, is a no-code backend, and so in order
Okay.
for you to like understand and appreciate that, you kind of have to know how software works. Any piece of
hmm
software has two components. It's the front end, that's what the user interacts with, and then the back end, and that is the thing that handles all of the business logic and things that really make your app work. And the example I always like to use is like Amazon's one-click buy. So you know how there's this button that says like click this to buy now.
Yeah,
So on the
hmm
front end, there's like a single button, right? That's what the user sees. That's pretty easy to
yeah,
build. But on the
yeah,
back end, once you click that button, it has to check inventory. It has to like make sure your credit card is valid. It has to look at the distribution centers. There might be like 50 things that it does to make sure that that package arrives at your door. And that's
yeah,
what the back end does. So traditionally, backends have been written by a team of engineers, right? Like
yeah,
using code. And while this whole no code movement, which I'm sure a lot of your listeners have heard about, has focused a lot on the front end, building like, websites and mobile applications, there
yeah.
hadn't been a lot of tools that focus on this whole business logic orchestration side of things. And so that is what Zano does. It brings you an entire scalable backend to build or for you to create without using any code. And that backend consists of a scalable server, a very flexible database, and a no-code API builder to do all of the business logic that I talked about.
Mm. All
Cool.
right, cool. Yeah, that's actually quite cool because, yeah, like you said, I've in the no-code industry, I've seen a lot of things like, but most of it, as you said, is front end. Design, development, front end development,
The
integrations on the
closest is
front
like
end as well. But there's
bubble,
nothing,
right?
yeah, there's
Yeah,
nothing real back endish. So like,
Yeah.
yeah, I think this is probably the first platform I found, in the no code space that does, work on the back end side of things, which is good.
Yeah,
yeah,
it's
Cool.
it's one of these things where like a lot of people don't realize like, well, why do you even have to have like a separate backend to do this
Mm-hmm.
stuff? But it really comes into structure and scalability. So what I like to give this example of like, imagine you were building an app like an Airbnb like type application. And
hmm,
so, if you're just, for example, listing places to stay, that's a pretty simple operation, no problem. Okay, well, what happens when you want to list activities nearby? Okay, well, you're getting a little more complicated. I might have to like communicate with a third party service to get that information based on my location of where I'm staying. But then
yeah,
what happens when you want to also get the weather, also find the places that are open during the time of my stay? The more complexity you add, which actually happens to be what makes your app unique and easier for the user to use, that more
yeah.
complexity adds load on the server. And typically, when you add that complexity with these other tools, they slow down. And so Xano was built to handle all of this complexity, but still remain fast and scalable, no matter how many users you throw at it.
Right. So yeah, I come from like building apps as like a background where my
Mhm.
first introduction to like this whole thing was through code and APIs and REST APIs and all of that. The main issue I had was I could get the front end done pretty quickly. It's just the back end bits, like connecting the API and just debugging it.
Yeah.
Always felt like that could be a better way to do it.
Hmm.
And the no code thing, when I discovered it, I'm like, oh yeah, websites and apps should be built visually. But now when I was looking at Xeno, to be fair, I heard of it before. I was looking for a solution for a client who had like an XML RSS feed and they wanted to feed that into Webflow. And I didn't really know how to do it. So I was just Googling and I came across the video that you made to connect Webflow with APIs.
Yeah.
And that's when I realized, oh yeah, I've never really thought about this, where a lot of this no code tools out there really focus on the front end bit.
Yeah.
But that kind of changed this year in the no code conference. I'm not sure if you watched it.
Mhm.
Did you have a chance to
I
catch?
did. I did. I was there at the Webflow one, right?
Yeah, the Webflow
Yeah.
one. Yeah. Yeah, so right like a week before that, I was just in our live stream, I was mentioning, yeah, it's great. Like we have all these front end tools, but there's not really anything that connects the back end of the stuff because
Yeah.
I have a lot of clients that come for like, hey, I have a database and I need a membership. It's always like 2, 3 software that you need to plug in. Oh, he just disappeared. And also like 2, 3, and you got to pay for them and you got to know how to connect. And there's always limitations to it. And I was just mentioning to him that, that'd be cool if Webflow has this thing where it connects to Airtable and it connects to, MemberStack or other tools natively. But then in the no-code conf, everyone is blown away with the business logic that they
Oh,
introduced
for sure.
right
It's
into
amazing.
Webflow.
It's
Yeah.
it's
So
so amazing.
Yeah.
yeah. So do you have any thoughts on that? Like, what was your first impression on that?
Yeah, because when I heard of that logic part as well, I was thinking as well, like for example, firstly that was crazy when I heard about Webflow releasing logic, but then I was gonna ask, like, do you think perhaps Xano and logic can connect, merge in a way, and create something even more powerful than logic itself?
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. So we're huge fans of Webflow. They're amazing. They've really pushed, I think, the ability for more people to make amazing applications and websites in a visual way, but also now that they're leveling them up with logic. So it's really amazing to see Webflow do that. I know that a lot of our customers are Webflow users and they've wanted this for a while. But I think that there's a world where both of us exist because there's, for example, front end logic using their internal CMS. But
Yeah.
then there's also more advanced backend logic. Like, so for example, Webflow is never going to be a centralized hub where you connect many different services together, transform data, potentially perform really intensive operations, and be that centralized place for it. Webflow is going to do a really good job at simple logic. And you saw that in their logic builder, right? Like
Yeah.
if this, or if there's a certain attribute of this user, then do this. The logic might get like 2 or 3 levels deep. With
Mhm.
Zano, some of our users have 20 lines of logic. And this is what I was saying, for example, for the Amazon use case, there might be
Yeah.
like 20 or 30 vendors that you need to talk to. And that's the benefit of having a robust backend. And there's no reason why the two can't work together. So Webflow, for example, might have a user that has a certain identifier that we can connect with a Xano user, right? And so you can
Mm.
get the best of both worlds. So the way that I look at logic and what they've introduced with Webflow, it just has made the tooling or the pairing of Xano and Webflow together even more powerful.
Right.
Awesome. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's kind of what I guessed would happen. But yeah, I mean, I said before when I heard of Zano, I was like, yo, this, with Webflow Logic and Zano, it's gonna be crazy. But yeah, Vermont, did you have another
Yeah.
question?
I was when you mentioned that your most of it are Webflow designers and developers, or just a
Oh,
portion?
no, I wouldn't say most, but we
Okay,
do
right.
have a healthy group of people that use Webflow
Okay,
along with, yeah.
and I expect them to be like enterprise clients, right? Where they have this, different levels of logic that you technically can't do with something like Zapier, a Parabola, or something like that.
Yeah, like, I think we bucket our customers into, we're still trying to find like the one ideal customer profile
Yeah.
that really gets
Hmm.
value from Zano. But to be honest, I think if I've learned anything, there's not one customer type. Typically, you have this broader bucket that we like to call like the citizen developer, and
Mm-hmm.
they are people that are, that maybe they've come from other companies, maybe they've come out of university, they have some technical know-how and experience,
Yeah.
and they want to not do the traditional route of hiring an engineering team. They want to have control over what they're creating. So that's kind of that demographic, and that's probably our largest set of users. We also have like agencies, so companies that
Mm.
are building for other people, right? And that can be an individual building, like a freelancer, or it can be like a big consulting agency. They also use us to build faster without having to scale their team. And then finally, like you said, we have enterprise use case where people come in and they need compliance. They might be building the same types of applications, but security is very important, or they're dealing with lots of data, or they need custom enterprise connectors to work
Yeah.
with Xano. So those are kind of like the three high level buckets of people that use us.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the whole question was like, I think one of the questions that we wanted to ask was, who is the target audience?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I really felt like 99% of no coders will never even see the point of something like Zeno, but the
Yeah.
1% that do are the ones that are working with like enterprise clients and very large scale projects. And I was trying to explain to Shayaz like 2 weeks ago about why APIs matter and
Yeah.
why can't you do everything with the CMS and yeah, I was messing around with it last week, just logging in to see how it works. And
Yeah.
even I was like, oh, what do I do with this? Like
Yeah.
I don't have a natural use case of it. So do you have any examples, like for example, any clients that use
For
Zeno?
sure. Yeah. So just, the way that we kind of like to talk about ourselves is that we are a tool typically that people graduate into. So what does
Yeah.
that mean? That means that they
Hmm.
might start, like they might have an idea to build an app of some sort, and they'll go to the simplest version of a database they can possibly find, which is traditionally something like Airtable or AppSheet, right?
Yeah.
And then they'll like try to link workflows together with maybe something like Zapier or Integromat or Parabola, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
But what ends up happening is they're using these disparate tools, and they might come across limitations either by record
Yeah.
limit or limitations on the things that you can do. And they're like, we need something that's either can handle these business logic things that we want to implement, but also be scalable and fast. And that's usually when they graduate into something like Xano. And so you have people that are very motivated to build that come to Xano to use us. Now, you are correct. In the no code community, there's a lot of tourists. There's a lot of people that are just fascinated by the space. They're not
Yeah.
necessarily like building anything to launch out into the world,
Yeah.
but they're interested in the possibility. Now, where we are right now is a very interesting place. You're seeing the surface area of people that can actually access these tools and build valuable things increasing. So these tourists are slowly going to turn into people that are using it, because more and more people are going to want to launch these ideas, whether they be Web3 ideas or the traditional Web2 ideas. And they're going to, what's their option? Hire an engineering team,
Yeah.
hire an engineer. And that's, you probably know, that's harder and harder to come by these days. The best
Yeah.
engineers are either gainfully employed, or they don't have any experience, or they're really expensive. So then you're like,
Yeah.
okay, well, I have to do it myself. And so tools like Xano and the other no code tools that we've talked about are going to be really, really important for them.
For
Yeah.
sure. Yeah. And I actually wanted to ask you, because when I was checking out Xano myself, I just wanted to ask, what is the barrier of entry with using Xano and actually getting a completed product with Xano? Do you have to be a coder, or do you have to have some knowledge on a certain language? What is the barrier of entry to Xano?
Yeah, Shay, that is a good question. You certainly don't have to be a coder, but you should have at least a general understanding of what a backend is, what a database is, and what an API is. So those three
Mm,
concepts alone, you're automatically excluding a ton of people, because a lot of people
Yeah.
don't
yeah.
necessarily know about those three concepts. And we've actually made a very concerted effort to not abstract away the terminology. So what does that mean? We call it an API. We don't call it a workflow. We don't call it a Zap, because what happens is, for example, with Zapier, that made these things accessible to people. If you don't have a Zap for the thing that you want, well, then you're stuck and you just have to wait for
Yeah.
the Zap. But if you understand about APIs and the fact that a Zap is just the APIs connecting together, well, then you can build your own, right? And you can connect
Yeah.
to these other services. APIs are the glue of the internet. So
Yeah.
if we can teach people about what they are, how to use them effectively, and finally how to build within Xano, we're helping everyone. And so I would say, as a prerequisite today, you have to have kind of a general knowledge of those things. But we have a lot of great documentation and videos to help try to upskill you to learn more and more, so you can actually be successful with a product like ours.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes
And
sense because before I remember before Vermeulen was actually telling me about all of these databases and stuff. I've never really used APIs before. So my background is HTML, CSS.
Yeah,
So I can design and develop front end. I don't really know much about the back end kind of thing,
yeah,
back end side of things, right? So I
yeah,
didn't know about APIs, back end, all of that stuff. I use Zapier sometimes, but I didn't have an understanding, like you said. There's a very limited amount of people in the world that have the understanding
totally.
of,
And
those three
that's a
components that you
problem for
mentioned.
us. That's a
Yeah,
problem for us to solve. We need to abstract away that complexity and teach more people. And
yeah.
there's actually, if you watch a lot of our videos, we try to even explain the concept of an API. And I
Mm,
bear with me here, but I'll kind of give you the analogy. We always use a restaurant metaphor, right?
yeah,
You
I
have this
watched that
okay.
one.
have you all seen this?
Yeah, I've seen that
I
one.
haven't seen it personally,
The
no.
one that
just
connects
just for
to,
your audience, basically the
yeah.
way we describe an API is, if you go to a restaurant, you basically have a customer. That customer might place a custom order with a waiter, right? Like, I want a cheeseburger with extra lettuce. That waiter then
Mm,
takes that order and then gives it to the kitchen. The kitchen makes the food, gives it to the waiter, and then the waiter makes the customer happy. So in that metaphor, the customer is your front end. They place the request with the waiter. That waiter, that messenger that goes back and forth and takes custom commands, they're your API, right? And
mm,
then the kitchen is your traditional backend, your server. And
Yeah.
depending, like, how fast the customer gets that cheeseburger with lettuce is how fast your server and your backend is. So when I explain APIs, they are a messenger. They go back and forth between the front end and the back end, taking these custom commands and either creating things in the database or sending things to back to the customer. And the reason we break it down and we try to make it as simple as possible is because, as you can see, it's not that abstract or complex
Yeah.
of something, but no
yeah,
one takes the time to break it down like that. And so the
yeah,
more we can do that, the more we can upskill people to learn these concepts and then build it for themselves.
yeah. I mean, it's because, y- everyone sees the front end side of things. You see a website, everyone sees it, looks pretty, and then they kind of that sparks the interest and stuff. But no one really sees that back end side of things. It's invisible, right? So
Yeah.
there's no spark of interest in that. That's why, for example, myself, I didn't really know much about this back end kind of stuff. So that's why, because I didn't see it working, I didn't see it in action, unlike the front end side of things. So
Yeah.
that's why it didn't really spark any interest in it. I didn't really know of it in the first place.
Yeah.
And because I didn't know of it, I didn't really take my time to learn it or anything. So that's why I don't really know about it, or I didn't, come across Xano before. But I think once you understand the power of backend, and once you actually experience what it's like and understand the, how powerful it can be, that's when, everyone will start to, learn more about the backend systems, APIs, and how that works,
Yeah.
and create much more powerful websites and,
Yeah, and
applications.
sometimes you may not need a backend. It's totally fine. Like, you may just need
Hmm.
a website with a form and simple logic. And I always
Hmm.
Yeah.
tell people, like, not everyone needs a backend, right? It
Yeah,
depends on your use case. But I
Yeah.
think that we work very well for when you want to build these comprehensive, like, applications that are very integrated. You're just not going to get that with the front end tools. There's only so much JavaScript that you can write to make that
for
happen,
sure.
and
Yeah,
then you need something more, just robust.
Yeah.
yeah.
So I was wondering, because I was messing around with the builder, like the Zeno builder. Do you, I don't know, maybe do you think would there be a market for, like, let's say we can visually build an API,
Mhm.
meaning that you can pretty much like Scratch. I'm not sure if you know Scratch, but you just add a link on the top and you just
I think that's a UK
like,
thing.
oh, is it?
Yeah, I
I
Yeah,
think.
don't
it's
I
like a
don't
visual.
know Scratch, but I'm gonna look it up after this call.
Oh yeah, it's like a
Are you
programming.
talking about that cat thing?
Yeah,
Oh
yeah.
yeah.
So we used to
Oh,
learn
okay,
this
yeah,
programming thing in our schools where it's pretty much the very first no code tool I think that ever existed.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's a very simple, like, if
Like
else
if this
builder
and
sort
that,
of
yeah,
thing. Yeah, it's like, if this happens, rotate, else rotate like this.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much I used to think of like, oh, that's the very first no code builder. You can
Yeah,
build
Mm.
pretty nice games with it. So I was
definitely.
wondering, like, because with all this visual front end development tools, do you think something like Webflow, but for the back end, where you can, instead of writing any code, you're just visually seeing things, putting
Yeah,
pieces
I mean,
together
that's
to build?
to be honest, that's where we're trying to head. And I think that it's difficult because well, first of all, to answer your question, yes, it would 100% be valuable. But
Yeah,
when you get into the complexity and nuance of back-end logic, it's not as simple as if then else conditions
yeah,
because that's Webflow's logic builder, which is
yeah,
great for simple use cases.
yeah,
But you have like for loops, right? That you have to contend with, and then for
yeah,
loops within for loops, and then if like
yeah.
things get super
Super
complex.
complicated.
So
Yeah,
So,
exponential,
you
isn't
know,
it? Yeah.
we're starting to work actually on a new no code API builder that is as like as simple as it can possibly be while supporting all of the nuanced complexities that, you know, we're discussing over here. But it
yeah,
probably will look a little bit different than a simple like line
yeah,
diagram
yeah,
thing
yeah,
because it has to, right? Like I
yeah.
think that you know, what if there's anything that I've learned is that, you know, they always say the devil is in the details.
Details. Yeah,
It's the exact same way with building a backend.
yeah,
There are so many nuances that are required to make a
yeah,
beautiful user experience on the front. If you think about, for example, something like Google, it's like a simple search box and you type it in, right?
yeah,
There's so much that's happening behind the scenes on the back end that you don't see. You just get the
yeah,
answer and you're happy, right? But
Mhm.
yeah,
depending on your location, depending on your preferences, it has to take in all of these considerations and then serve you up the right answer. So yeah, you know, you're right. The more we can abstract it, the better. But it's a harder problem than you might think.
yeah. And
Okay.
that's the limitation with like a lot of these no code tools is where sometimes it's just easier to do it with code. Like something with
Yeah,
sometimes I do it with Webflow. It's
yeah,
like that the amount of clicks it needs that I need to do to just get one thing done. I
yeah.
can paste like a 2 line of code and just it's much faster,
Totally.
right?
You're right. You're
Yeah.
100% right. So you kind of what's interesting right now is that previously engineers like yourself would not even think about using a no code tool. They'd be like,
Yeah.
"No, no,
Yeah.
never. I'm never going to use that."
Yeah.
So now they're starting to be like, "Okay, I see the value. Maybe it will use it to prototype and for the MVP, but when it
Yeah.
comes time to really build the real thing, I'm going to hand roll everything."
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but
Because
we're
when
slowly going to transition, I promise you, to this world where everyone just builds in no code. In fact, no code is just the word right now, but it's not even going to be called that. It's just going to,
yeah.
these are the tools that you're going to use to build
Mm.
things.
Yeah, because I
So
remember while in uni, I was just building websites. I was coding it from scratch, it's like HTML, CSS,
mm,
JavaScript, and I was like, "Oh, why would anyone use WordPress or Wix? I will never use that. I have my
yeah,
knowledge and skills."
yeah,
And then the moment you figure out something, because the thing with Webflow, I really like it's the complexity of it. It's not
yeah.
abstracted to pieces where it's so dumbed down that
Yeah, you
it's
can
just
modify the
impossible.
CSS, you can do
Yeah,
animation, right? You
yeah,
shared classes, like
and you
all of
can
these
add code to it.
concepts. Yeah,
Yeah,
you get, and I think they've done a really good job of that. And this is why I really believe what I was saying earlier. You should not treat users like they're infants. Like
yeah,
Mm.
treat them like, hey, look, if you want to build to the complexity and using all best practices, we're going to give you ways to do that. But we're also going to make it accessible enough to where if you don't know about CSS, if you don't know about JavaScript, you're still going to be able to use it. Maybe not to the extent that other people
yeah.
will, but we're going to let you use it. And we very much subscribe to that philosophy.
Yeah, because that
Yeah.
reduces the barrier of entry where
Yeah,
anybody can enter and build something. But if you want to take it to the next level, you can always learn. And learning from zero to coming to something like building a website or an app takes so much time.
yeah,
Whereas coming from like a no code place to, starting to code, the jump is much, much less because while you're using these no code tools, especially Webflow, you kind of understand how HTML works, how CSS works.
yeah.
You learn by doing.
Yeah, definitely. And if you think about like a website's a really good example of I think where the world is headed because just think about it this way. If someone asked you that was non-technical, like, hey, like I want to build a website, like what should I do? There'd be no universe where you'd recommend that they like learn HTML and CSS and hand roll
Yeah,
it themselves and learn about
yeah,
hosting and where to put it. You'd be like, oh, go to Webflow, go to Squarespace, one of these
yeah,
sites that gives them basically it accelerates the time that they can get a website on there, and they can modify all the nuances in a beautiful little WYSIWYG editor.
Yeah.
And application development is having that renaissance right now, where right now there are cases where you're going to need to hire an engineering team like
Yeah.
to do what you're doing, but that's not going to happen. That's not going to be there for so much longer.
Yeah. And I think
Yeah.
that could even be said to like back end building slowly. Once like the front end bit
Absolutely.
becomes so obvious that no code is the faster and the better way
Yeah.
to do it.
Because why would you want to? If it can build
Yeah.
like faster, using the same
Cheaper.
best practices for
Yeah.
cheaper,
Yeah.
why would you want to spend the time manually
Yeah.
doing it?
Yeah. And
It's like
recently,
would you rather write a handwritten letter and send it, go to your local post office, or write an email? Like back in,
That's
yeah,
right.
it's the same thing, right? Like it's
yeah.
just such a
And I've
more
But there
also
are
seen
convenient
this.
purists,
solution.
Shays. There are purists that are like,
Yeah.
it's got to be that nice calligraphy pen
Yeah.
with a feather. You got
Yeah.
to make sure everything's perfect. So I
Yeah.
appreciate that. I appreciate that. It's just not for most people.
Yeah. Because
Exactly.
there's
Yeah.
this whole debate of like coding developers are like, oh, no code is just a trend. It's just a fad.
Yeah.
At some point you would need code. And I'm like, yeah, we do, but it's not going to take a job away or anything. We need coders to build all these platforms and tools to
Well,
abstract it out.
not only that, but there's a difference between like a software engineer and like just a developer, right?
Yeah.
Meaning that there is thought put behind what is an efficient way to write something. How can I look at the
Yeah.
bigger picture and look at how I can build something scalable? Because there's always a wrong way to build something. Like
Yeah.
I don't, no code isn't at the place. It will be maybe in the future, but you can, because you can do anything that you want, you can certainly build inefficient products.
Yeah.
And so software engineers, I think, working together with no code tools, at least from what we've seen, they get the most out of the products, because if they believe in the promise of no code, I mean, you should see some of the complex things that some of these engineers build. It's beautiful, and they're using all engineering best practices, just like you were saying you do in Webflow, because you understand the structure of how good, clean HTML and CSS and JavaScript should be written.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't get us started off, unclean HTML, JavaScript, and CSS.
It's already an issue with Webflow.
Yeah,
I
definitely.
know.
Yeah.
I know. It's hard, because when you abstract away something, you necessarily have to break the paradigm sometimes to give people flexibility.
Yeah.
But as much as possible, you obviously don't want to break that.
Yeah.
For
And
sure.
suddenly that brought up the question of how did you come up with this idea for Zeno? Was it
Yeah.
because of need, or you just thought of it and you saw the future of no code?
Yeah, so the origin story didn't start with me personally. It started
Okay.
with my two co-founders, Jack and Sean. So Sean and I actually like grew up together. We knew each other when we were like 12, and
wow.
we both were at Google together. And
Yeah.
he went off and he went the agency development route, and I went
Mhm.
off and did like the entrepreneur startup route. So when he did the agency route, he started the agency with Jack, and they basically, and this was like 10 years ago, they were building for clients all sorts of mobile and web applications, and they noticed patterns like, okay, we're building the same things over and over. I'm sure you've seen this before,
Yeah.
where you just are like, wow, why am I doing this over and over? So
Yeah.
the first version of Xano was an internal tool, command line version,
Mm.
to address building it faster. It was very much like a toolkit to just accelerate the first part of the build. And then over the course of 8 to 10 years, it got so good that you were creating these comprehensive backends sometimes in an hour. And then I was watching this from the sidelines and saying, look, there's something here. If we took this and like productized it and made this
Yeah.
accessible to the world, it's going to change because there's nothing like this that exists right now.
Yeah.
And I would still say there's nothing like Xano that exists. And so we decided to do that a couple of years ago, and then we just opened our doors in January of this year. So even though we just
Oh,
opened our
okay.
doors in January, we've
Right.
been working on this for a long time, and it's been battle tested across hundreds of applications.
Right.
So, and that's actually a good thing. Like I feel very comforted in the fact that, like, sure, you can try to compete with us, but that's like 10 years of experience
Yeah.
and like
Yeah.
hundreds of apps.
And that is rare in the software industry. It's like it's
Yeah.
always like launch first and then fix it as you go.
Yeah,
Whereas if
Yeah.
10 years of work has already been done, you've
that's
probably
right.
seen all the edge cases and everything.
Yeah, and that's
Yeah.
why, I think that's why Xano is unique because it handles all of these edge cases. Like
Yeah.
not a lot of applications, especially in the no code space, can say that they can handle every unique edge case.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I actually want to go a bit further back, Prakash, if that's all right. So
Let's do it.
when did all of this start? Because I remember I checked out your LinkedIn. I've done a bit of background research, and I see that you were a designer, I believe.
Yep.
So why didn't you tell us a bit more about, firstly, how did you even get into design? Is that something that you always wanted to do? And then after that, if you can explain, how did that transition to starting Zano and, becoming an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I think in the very beginning, we were talking a little bit before the record button hit, but
Yeah.
so I am half Sri Lankan and half Chinese, right?
Right.
You can call it
Okay.
Indian for short.
Right.
So,
Indian, Malaysian has.
I have two
Yeah.
Asian parents that wanted
Yeah.
my upbringing to be the traditional route, the doctor,
Yeah.
lawyer,
Yeah.
an engineer was even like that's a
Less.
relatively new thing, right?
Yeah.
And so when I was growing up, I always edged towards like the creative design side of things. But
Mhm.
my parents really wanted me to, if I was going to pursue something there, to pursue computer science. So I
Mm.
went to school originally for computer science, but I realized very quickly, and my grades reflected it, that my brain does not work that way. And so I had this. I remember having this talk with my dad. He was super disappointed, but I said, "Look, this is like what's my calling, this design side of things." But he, to his credit, he eventually said, "Look, if this is what you truly are meant to do, then I want you to be the best at it." And so
Yeah.
I started off as a visual designer, right? So that means just
Mhm.
making things look as nice as possible. And through a lot of luck and some help from Sean, I was brought in to be the visual designer for Picasa. And so for the audience that doesn't know, it's a photo organizing software that was eventually acquired by Google. So I
Yeah.
became a visual designer
Wow.
first. And then once we were acquired by Google, I learned about the art of user experience design, which is not just visual design, but it's the art of making someone successful in your design in a delightful way. And so my career around design and user-centered design started, obviously in college, just doing websites and graphics and things of that nature, but evolved more into user experience design when I joined Google.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's funny how much it's things haven't changed yet, because that's literally what I had like 3 months, 4 months ago. When I told my dad I'm done with engineering, he was like, "Oh, so when are you getting a job?" I'm like, "No, I don't want to get a job. I'm doing what I want to do." And he was like, "Oh, what is this website? Are you just like IT support?" I'm like, "No, I design stuff." It's like he just doesn't understand until
Yeah,
they
it
see
doesn't,
how much money. Yeah,
and I'm trying to, like, now that I'm a father,
yeah,
I'm trying to constantly remind myself that everyone has their own path, right?
yeah,
And
Mhm.
everyone's passions are different. And I already, of course, like I have a template in my mind of what success looks like and the steps you
yeah,
need to take. But I have to remember that, when my parents were growing up, I don't blame them because there was no
yeah,
internet. You
yeah,
had to go to a really good school and you had to become doctor, lawyer, engineer in order to like
Mhm.
have any modicum of success. But
yeah,
then this internet thing came and democratized everything and then made it possible for people like us to become entrepreneurs and create our own way. So,
yeah.
who knows what the next generation is going to look like? And it's important for all of us to be open minded.
Yeah,
Definitely.
and
Yeah.
then
I think
I say
all of
this,
us
and
have
then
experienced that. Yeah.
30 years from now, I do the same thing.
Yeah, we'll see. Yeah, exactly.
We'll see.
Yeah. So Prakash, I actually wanted to speak a little bit more about your Google experience. So, do you think that your experience working in Google helped you with Zano, and you know, or if it didn't, where did it help? That makes
I think
sense.
it absolutely did. So, being at Google, well, first of all, you're working with like some of the smartest people in the
Yeah.
world. So I definitely had an imposter syndrome while I had to like figure myself out while I was there. But, being a user experience designer at Google, it's really, again, like I mentioned, it's about getting users to the answer faster in a delightful way in whatever design experience you put together. And a large part of that is education. It's treating people, of course, with respect, but teaching them how to be successful in your interface. So that
Mm.
grain, or that I guess piece of the DNA, has always stuck with me, and I've brought that very much into Xano. So rather than just being like an engineering tool for only engineers, I think we definitely wanted to steer it more to the masses. Like, how do we? One part of it is, of course, the product itself, but the other part of it, which you'll see in our documentation, in our videos, in our community, is education and teaching and giving back. And
Yeah.
so that piece of it is something I certainly learned at Google and that I bring with me today.
Yeah, for sure. I think that kind of aspect of no code platforms is a huge thing. Like with Webflow as well, they have their own university, which is amazing as well. I'm sure, with Zano, you have all your documentation of videos. So yeah, I think that really, really helps. And of course, your Google experience helped you, bring that to life for sure.
Yeah, I really like that Webflow Xeno video you made. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, now I saw the opportunity of like, I can pull data from like other APIs, which I didn't want to do initially because I have to code or I have to deal with, Zapier and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But then that brings
But
me
you'll
to
see,
like,
even in that one video, for example,
yeah,
I could have just showed you how to do it. However, I took the time to go
Yeah.
through the JavaScript file, to go line by
yeah,
line and explain everything. And I've had
yeah,
engineers say, "Hey, there's a more efficient way to do it." Of course,
yeah,
like I
yeah,
know there are more efficient ways, but this is kind of, I think it's an educational experience. It's a chance to educate people that, hey, look, more is possible, right?
yeah,
If I just showed them how to do it, right, that would be it. That would be the end of their understanding. But
yeah.
showing them the possibility of what's and breaking down how everything works will hopefully open up other doors for them. So if they come across a problem again, they know what to search for.
Yeah, and it kind of blew my mind. Like I just checked it. It's like it has like 10, almost 9K views on that
Yeah.
video. That kind
Wow.
of
I
shows.
didn't even realize that.
Yeah,
Wow.
because I saw it earlier. I was like, oh, and I
Yeah.
checked it again. I'm like, that can't be. Like,
Yeah.
I don't think there's that much demand. But yeah, it's like it's almost 9,000 views.
Yeah.
That kind of shows that there is a little bit of demand. And I usually see this in like the Slack channels where people are asking for, how do I connect external APIs? And I think that's definitely going to grow as
Mhm.
Webflow gets more mainstream and
Yeah.
more companies and bigger enterprises start coming in. Do you have any plans on making, I don't know, like clonables or like videos, tutorials on what you can do with Zeno?
Yes, definitely. We actually have them right now. We don't advertise them really well, but we have these things called snippets, like backend snippets, which
Mhm.
are, at least to my knowledge, the very first like clonable backends, like little backends that you can clone and that perform
Yeah,
something, right?
yeah,
So you might be able to do like build like a mini Yelp app and be able to clone
mm,
that and even try that out as an anonymous user. So we do
right,
have that.
yeah,
We're going to be like focusing more energy on advertising it more. And the cool thing is
that,
some of them come with videos, explainer videos on how to use them.
yeah. Because I
Um,
was in the backend and I saw this chat app thing, like
yeah,
a template that you can just add to your backend.
yeah,
I was like, oh, so then I can just make a very quick chat app if I want to. And then
exactly.
then you can pair that with Webflow's clonable, where you
Yeah,
can clone the front end and you can
yep,
clone the back end, and you can
that's
make
right.
something of your own. Oh yeah, that opens up quite a lot of doors.
Yeah,
Just my
it's all
mind in my
about getting
mind.
people, again, get people to their answers faster, right? So
Yeah,
if you can help them
Yeah.
build, like they're looking to build a chat app, if you
yeah,
have like 80% built for them, well then all they have to do is 20% of work. We've already
yeah,
taken all the best practices and all that complexity away from them.
yeah, and that kind of opens up a lot of ideas and tools that you can develop with this backend in mind. Like once you build something, you see the limitations, you see what the possibilities, and then your mind kind of puts things together. Like,
That's
okay, I
right.
can build this and I can build that. So I think definitely those kind of videos where it goes that teaches you how to use Xeno and maybe put a clonable of that specific snippet as well as the front end bit. So I can just clone both, connect it, and at least try it to see if it works.
Yes,
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah.
that's cool.
And I agree with that as well. Like before, I mean, I can use an example as well with web development. Like before I even was introduced to this industry, I didn't know anything about websites or anything. But once I started learning HTML, CSS, coding, Webflow, it kind of just by understanding it, not even having experience building a proper website, just by having knowledge on the platform, it really opened a lot of doors. Um, I can see the possibilities of doing certain things. And I think Ali Abdal, shout out to Ali Abdal, but he even said this. He said everyone should learn how to code
Mhm.
because, it really does open your mind into what is possible and what is not. For example, if a person doesn't know how to code, he won't see the possibilities in making something easier. But then a person that does know how to code, he might see something, experience something in life in general, and then he might think, oh, that can be, more efficient by using code. I know how to do this and that. So yeah, just by having knowledge of that really, really does open a lot of doors, and it can, you know, amazing platforms get built just by that. So,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
think, with the knowledge base that Webflow has, as well as Xano, I think that will definitely open a lot of doors and make people, have knowledge on the platforms, and then they can understand the possibilities of what they can create.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I totally agree with what
Yeah,
Vermont
when
said.
you said everyone should code, when I was in uni, the very first programming class I had, I completely failed it, and I was so pissed off. Like, why do I need to code? It doesn't make sense. I'm just an engineer.
Yeah.
But then once, because I failed it, I had to redo it in order to pass that year, because that's
Yeah.
how silly the education system is. Once I actually put some thought to it because I had to, it immediately opened my mind. I'm like,
Yeah.
that's not that hard. Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's like you're just dumbing it down so much.
Yeah.
We are not taught to dumb things down. You're
Yeah.
always taught to like make it more complex so it sounds
That's
more.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
but
right.
coding is all about just the simplest
Efficiency.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, just as simple as you can do, and
That's
just
right.
telling like a computer what to do.
Yeah.
The
No, I
moment
couldn't
it clicks, it just works.
totally. I couldn't agree
Yeah.
more. And I think yeah, there's two pieces to it. There's one is the way that it helps you perceive problems, like to
Yeah.
look for shortcuts that you might not otherwise have when you have that knowledge in the back of your mind. But the other piece of it is just what is learning to code? Like today, I think that was a message that was stated largely because it's like we need more developers and people to create
Yeah.
things into the world, which may be true, but tools like Xano, like Webflow, are just making that more accessible to people. So soon, it doesn't have to be like, the syntax of writing
Yeah.
like JavaScript or PHP or anything like
Yeah.
that, but just learning like logically, how do you think through problems, right? Using these
Yeah.
tools, you'll get
Hmm.
out the same result.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, me and Vermont, we make clonables, and in Webflow, and literally the exact same thing happens where, I have like this idea of how to make things more efficient. So just as an example, one of my clonables, it's a sitemap builder. So I got the idea from another tool that I use to build my sitemaps. But then just by understanding, having that knowledge in the back of my mind, like you said, about Webflow, I thought that, this could be made inside of Webflow. So that's what I done, and I released as a clonable. So yeah, I totally agree. And I don't know exactly how, all of the HTML, CSS, and the JavaScript works, but it works.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree with what you said. You have to have the knowledge, but then you don't have to have all of the knowledge to the extent where you know all the little
Yeah.
details. You just
And
have to
and
have
that's where it
that
starts.
logic.
Most
Yeah,
people just get a template to get it working, and it works.
exactly.
But
Yeah.
then what will happen is they'll be like, "I wanna change this small piece," right?
Yeah.
And that's when they expand their mind. They'll, like, get into it. They're like, "What does all of this mean?" And then once
Hmm.
they make that one, let's just say it's simple as a background color change, right? That
Yeah.
simple.
Hmm.
For someone that's never done that before, that's a really daunting task. They're like, "I don't
Yeah.
know how to do this." But
Yeah.
then understanding, like, once they get into the code and they see the place that changes the background color and they actually do it for themselves, that's a huge accomplishment, right?
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
they've leveled themselves up.
Yeah.
And so that's typically how it's done. They always start from somewhere, and it always starts with like, okay, well, let me make these small tweaks.
Yeah.
That's how I learned how to code, right? Like whatever code I know, I would never call myself a developer or an
Yeah.
engineer, but I started with pre-done things and then I wanted to make changes. And then after a while, I wanted to make so many changes that I'm like, oh, okay, now I know kind of how
Yeah.
the entire system works, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like usually you start off with like a YouTube tutorial on like how
Yeah.
to build a to-do app. And then like I just want to change this little thing. And then you go on this
Right.
whole rabbit hole of like Stack Overflow. And then
Exactly.
Yeah.
at one point you're just realizing you're just building something on your own. And
Yeah.
that is
Yeah, for
actually very,
sure.
very addictive. It's about code. Could be
Oh,
annoying
for sure.
sometimes when it doesn't work. But once it works, it's like the most rewarding thing that you can
Oh, it's
actually
so
do.
rewarding. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
Definitely.
Just to get
Yeah.
something working, and it's so funny, sometimes you'll
Yeah.
present it to someone that doesn't
It just
understand
doesn't
anything about coding.
Tell
You're
me
like,
Yeah.
about
"Look
it.
what I did," and they're like,
Yeah.
"Whatever."
Okay. Nice.
Literally, that same thing happened to me. So I'm actually building a website for my uni, right? And I'm showing this to all. So I had like this voting system
Yeah.
where you can vote and stuff, and it shows up. And for me, it's really interesting. I'm really proud of myself of doing that. But when I show other students, like, look, I built this, like, okay. But then I'm thinking in my head, bro, like, you should be happy. Like, you should be ecstatic because, like, But again, I don't blame them, right? Because they don't understand, the
Yeah,
complexity of it
dentist.
and all of
Yeah.
that stuff.
They don't most
But yeah,
people don't unless they try to do it themselves, and they're
Yeah,
always surprised. They're like, "Oh,
yeah,
wow, I thought it would just work." But then they realize, like, there's always it's that nuance, right? There's always, like, these small, intricate details of what makes a beautiful user experience. Like, it
yeah,
it typically means that the person building it had to go through a lot to get it just right for you to have a wonderful experience. And so
yeah,
unless you are a part of like that citizen developer community, it's hard for others to understand.
yeah.
definitely. Yeah, for sure.
Cool.
So yeah, we just want to, so just as a wrap up, right? What I just want to ask you, Prakash, what is the future plan for Zano? And actually, before I get into that, how, so, 2021 is coming to an end, it's December, the year's almost ending. So I wanted to ask you, how has this year been for Zano? I know that you said you launched it in January, but why didn't you tell us a bit about, how Zano has performed this year and where do you see things heading in the future?
Yeah, I mean, we've had a pretty stellar year, to be honest. It's like, I think for everything that we are trying to accomplish here as a no code backend, we've grown like 20 to 30% month over month.
Wow. Okay.
We got number two on Product Hunt. So Product Hunt normally is for like
Wow.
consumer
Yeah,
productivity tools, but a no code backend got number two product of the day.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a big accomplishment for us. A lot of
Yeah.
people
100%.
voted up
Yeah.
like, hey, there's this thing that I can create these scalable, like who would have thought scalable backend number two on Product Hunt? We were
Yeah.
very happy with that. And I think that moving into next year, we hope to have the same growth. Obviously, the numbers are higher now, so
yeah,
getting
Yeah.
that 20 to 30% growth is going to be more challenging. But I think we've been really just pleasantly surprised with the response of the platform. But also, it's due to a lot of our hard work. We work very, very hard to make sure that the product is as good as it can be. We listen to our customers. And if you like look at any of our reviews, whether that be on our website, if you scroll down to the bottom, or you look at anywhere that talks about us, they'll always talk about our team. And that's who I'm most proud of. Like our team is super hands-on and we really, really try our best to make the best tool that our customers want. And I hope that we're always like that. And so that's kind of like, I think how we're going to move forward into 22 with that posture and that philosophy.
yeah. I'm
For
definitely
sure.
looking to like mess around with it to see what we can build, just just to see what how much my mind can learn new things again. But it's definitely
Yeah.
something excited me after a long time, like the same sort of excitement when I first found Webflow.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, now I need to just spend some time to
Oh,
just think
Ramala,
about
that's a
what.
that's a compliment. But yeah, it's also worth noting we hold office hours and orientation every single week,
Yeah,
3 times a week. And the reason we do that is because sometimes people want to have a space where they can come and work with
just
other builders and
yeah,
solve problems. And
or just
and
ask questions
yeah, our
sometimes.
whole
Yeah,
team is there. We
yeah,
are answering questions. If you're working through a challenge, we'll work through it with you. So there's lots of ways to be successful in the product.
yeah. So definitely
Awesome.
need to
Yeah.
think about what we can do. Something start with something simple, in just to show Zeno and Webflow, and then that I think definitely has a potential to grow.
Yeah,
Definitely.
for
Awesome.
sure.
All right, Prakash,
Cool.
do you want to perhaps tell the audience where they can find you, if you want to add any links perhaps, or if you want to shout out Xano, where can they find to, start learning Xano and how to get started with Xano and all of that good stuff.
Yeah, so I would just start honestly, go to xano.com and you can just go ahead and sign up. We have an onboarding workflow. You can tell us like what front end you're going to use, and we have like lots of video tutorials that surface up depending on the answers that you tell us. Check out our YouTube channel. Like all our social is the handle no code backend. So Twitter no code backend, YouTube no code backend. Check that out and yeah, I think if anyone has or questions about anything, they can even like direct message me on Twitter. I'm at
Awesome.
Prakasam, so PRAK awesome, and I'm happy to help in any way that I can. And I
Awesome.
know that our team is also there for you. So,
Nice one.
so yeah, thank you so much.
All right.
No
Thank you.
worries.
Thank
Yeah,
you so
so we're
much
gonna
for the
have all of
time.
the links of this what Prakash mentioned in the description. So make sure to check him out. But yeah,
Yeah,
Vamani, you wanna
thanks,
do the
Prakash, for
outro?
your time. Really
For sure.
appreciate it.
Yeah.
Oh no, it was a pleasure. So thank you so much for your time. I always love just talking about no code, and especially with people that are kind of in it and
Yeah.
builders themselves. So I really appreciate the opportunity.
Definitely.
All right.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you
Thanks
very
so
much,
much.
Prakash. See you guys soon. Bye bye.
Bye bye.